This man rescued crying wolf cubs and their dying mama wolf. What happened after will shock you. One early morning, John was walking back to his cabin after a long, exhausting few days of prospecting. Suddenly, he froze in place. A sharp, painful howl sliced through the air. He dropped his camping gear and crept closer, pushing aside the brush to see what was going on. In a small clearing stood a massive Alaskan timber wolf. Imagine stumbling upon a wild animal like this, easily weighing over 100 pounds. Her leg was clearly caught in a trap, and she was struggling to break free. Then she collapsed, looking completely worn out, like she had given up all hope. John couldn't believe what he was seeing. He wanted to help, but as he stepped closer, the wolf growled, pulling at the chains and bristling in fear. She wasn't angry, just terrified. John backed off to avoid making it worse, but then he noticed something unexpected. The wolf was female, which wasn't too surprising, but her teeth were coated in milk. That meant she had cubs nearby, and if they were still alive, they were in serious danger. Nursing puppies can't survive long without their mother. If John hoped to reunite them, he had to act fast. Still, there was no way he could safely get close enough to free her, not without risking a serious bite. The wolf looked incredibly weak, like she was on the brink of death. Her leg had been bleeding badly, and if left much longer, she wouldn't make it. But John had been through too much in life to give up now. And he wasn't about to give up on this mother wolf either. Every second counted. He knew that if he didn't act now, she, or her cubs, might not make it. He struggled with how to free her safely, but when he looked at her again, she was no longer moving. She had fought with everything she had, but now the pain and blood loss had overwhelmed her. Time had run out. John had to release her from the trap immediately and tend to her wounds. He reached out and touched her paw. No response. She was completely out of it. It was now or never. John grabbed his sleeping bag, tossed it over the wolf's head, and slowly pulled it down to cover her entire body. He hoped it would be enough to keep her calm and contained while he worked to free her leg and make a run for safety. He pressed the trap's release button, but nothing happened. It was jammed. It looked like it had bent when the wolf had thrashed in an attempt to escape. He had to get her free, fast, or she was going to die. Picking up a rock, John pounded on the release mechanism again and again until finally it sprang open. Without wasting a second, he wrapped the wolf tightly in the sleeping bag and sprinted toward his cabin, carrying her with everything he had. It wasn't easy, but John was a strong man. Within 50 minutes, he reached the cabin. He laid the wolf down beside the fireplace. She was ice cold. Luckily, the fire was already set up. He lit it quickly, and as the room warmed, he got to work. Reaching for his first aid kit, he cleaned the wound and stitched it carefully. John had some medical training and knew exactly what to do. Her leg was also broken, and he needed to straighten it and fit a splint to keep it stable. If he'd waited any longer, she probably would have lost the leg. Now he could only hope it wasn't too late to save her life as well. She slowly began to show signs of life, but John gave her a sedative. The moment she growled at him again was the first time he knew she'd pull through. She needed him, but didn't want him too close. Knowing she'd eventually wake up, John carefully moved her out of the cabin and into the shed. With the splint on her leg, she wouldn't be able to move quickly. After making sure she was stable and looking better, John set off to search for the cubs. But where should he even begin? He packed a bag, grabbed his flashlight, and headed out. The cubs couldn't be far. Mother wolves don't stray too far from their den. John was only visiting Alaska before leaving to serve in the Second World War as a medic. But his survival and tracking skills were solid. He'd need every bit of them to rescue those pups. Without him, they didn't stand a chance. He searched the area carefully, following tracks until he finally caught a break. Some prints were leading from the direction the wolf had come from. It wasn't much, but it was a place to start. John climbed the mountain as quickly as he could, watching carefully for any signs of a den. Missing one could mean disaster for the helpless cubs waiting for their mom. Suddenly, something caught his eye. He stopped, backtracked, and spotted a small hidden opening in the ground. It looked promising, possibly the den he had been searching for. But there was one problem: how to get the wolf cubs to come out. They were trained to stay inside unless they heard their mother, even if staying hidden meant starving. Still, John was determined to try. He gave his best imitation of a wolf's call: nothing. He tried again, still silence. Just as he was wondering if he should risk crawling into the den, a tiny wolf cub peeked out. It was crying from hunger, probably the only reason it dared to come out without hearing its mother's voice. After that brave little one stepped forward, the rest of the cubs followed soon after. They were tiny, but they were still little wolves. Knowing he couldn't carry all four in his arms, John gently placed them into his bag and zipped it up. They were safe inside, but he still had to check whether any more cubs were hiding in the den. Crawling into a wolf den with only a flashlight for protection wasn't exactly smart, but the thought of leaving even one pup behind was unbearable. He had to be sure. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as he lay flat on his stomach and crawled inside. Thankfully, the tunnel wasn't as deep as he feared, but it was still dark, and it reeked of fear. He swept his light across the space. No more wolves. He could finally leave, confident that no pups were left behind. With the bag of pups secured, John headed back toward their mother. It felt completely surreal, carrying a bag full of wolf puppies. As they approached, the mother must have heard their faint cries. She let out a soft howl. Carefully, John set the bag down and released them one by one into the shed. He hoped his scent on the pups wouldn't cause her to reject them. If she didn't accept them, then all his effort would have been for nothing. But the puppies knew their mother and rushed toward her. She sniffed them as they reached her side, and John held his breath. Would she recognize them? The tough outdoorsman couldn't help getting emotional when she began to lick them. Then she lay down, and the pups immediately began to nurse. Her entire body seemed to relax at once. Still, her leg was in terrible shape. John had to figure out a better way to help her, or she'd lose it, and a wild wolf with only 3 legs wouldn't survive. Neither would her cubs. But first things first. The mother wolf had been trapped for who knew how long. She had to be starving, and now feeding her babies would dehydrate her even more. John knew of a nearby spot where hunters kept meat frozen in the snow. They called it nature's cold storage. Everyone was okay with sharing when needed, and right now this definitely counted as an emergency. He sliced off a large chunk of meat and tossed it piece by piece toward the hungry timber wolf. She might not have trusted him, but she didn't turn down the food. Not like she had much of a choice. He also poured some water into a food bowl and used a stick to slide it closer. At least now she wasn't growling at every move he made, and to John that was progress. But the moment he inched forward to check her injured leg, she'd bare her teeth and try to snap at him. Still. John and the wolf had both had a long, exhausting day and desperately needed rest. To help earn her trust, he placed his sleeping bag as close to her as he could, without being in biting range. He'd really prefer not to wake up with a wolf chewing on his arm. It took him a while to fall asleep, but the wolf pups didn't seem to have the same trouble. Most of them snuggled up beside their mom, but the same little girl who had first come to him earlier curled up beside John and fell asleep right there. At least someone fully trusted him. The next morning, he woke to find wolf pups tumbling and playing all over him. Not a bad way to start the day. But what happened next would completely catch him off guard. John had to go out daily for fish and firewood to keep feeding the wolves and warming the cabin. He often left the door open so the pups could come and go freely. What he didn't expect was for them to bring guests. One day, as he returned home, he stopped dead in his tracks. His yard was filled with a whole pack of wolves. They'd come to check on the she-wolf. This had to be her pack, the family that had been searching for her and the cubs. But stepping into his backyard and finding himself surrounded by wild wolves was a whole different kind of surprise. For a moment, John was frozen in fear. The pups, of course, ran straight to him, happy and carefree. But the adult wolves turned sharply, their fur bristling, growling low in their throats. They looked ready to attack. Then suddenly, one wolf barked. Loud. It was the she-wolf, the very one John had helped. As soon as she barked, the other wolves immediately calmed down. They stopped growling. Their postures softened. But John wasn't about to test his luck. He slipped into the cabin and closed the door behind him. The she-wolf still couldn't put weight on her injured leg, and the splint was still on. John was relieved to see that she and the pups hadn't left yet. Just a few days later, he could tell she was getting stronger. He didn't know how to remove the splint safely, but she solved that problem by chewing it off herself. Soon she could walk again, and in time she would be able to run. One morning she barked at her pups. They all stood up and followed her. John understood. They were leaving. He wondered if he'd ever see them again. But the answer came much sooner than expected. He had just sat down, feeling a little sad, when he noticed movement at the door. The she-wolf was back. She barked at him, as if calling him to follow. It felt unreal, but John had bonded with her deeply through her recovery. Even if he didn't know where she wanted to lead him, he couldn't say no. He picked up his rifle and followed. The pups darted around his legs as they climbed the mountain nearby. Before long, they reached a flat clearing, where the rest of the wolf pack was already waiting. John froze at first, but the wolves didn't seem interested in him. They were too busy welcoming the mother and her cubs home. John backed off a little and watched from a safer distance. It was breathtaking, seeing them reunite in such a peaceful place. It felt like the mother wolf had brought him there to show that her family wouldn't hurt him. It was a quiet, beautiful moment. One of the last peaceful memories John would carry with him for a long, long time. Now that they had rejoined their pack, it was time to leave them for good. John began walking down the mountain, but something made him pause and glance back. The she-wolf was watching him go. He wasn't sure why, but he raised his hand in a small wave. She responded with a long howl, as if to say goodbye. Her puppies came to stand beside her, and when John looked back one last time, they had vanished. It was a bittersweet moment. After that, John stayed in Alaska for a while, but nothing else came close to what he had experienced with the wolves. Still, he knew it was time to go home. His time with them had felt like a bubble, peaceful and distant from everything else. But back home, reality was waiting. And it wasn't kind. He didn't stay long before he was called to serve in the war. What came next were the darkest days of his life. Fighting in the war couldn't have been further from the calm, majestic wilds of Alaska. He lost many friends. He saw and did things he never thought he'd have to face. Things he would try to forget for the rest of his life. It was a nightmare. Every single day felt like death was waiting around the corner. And then one day it came closer than he could have imagined. They were ambushed, attacked from all sides. John fought hard, but all he could think about was how much kinder the wolves had been, compared to the cruelty of these moments. Then a grenade exploded near his group. The last thing he remembered before everything went black was the clear blue sky over Alaska and the sound of a wolf howling, as if calling him home. Then, nothing. John woke up in a hospital. His body burned with pain, but he was alive. He was lucky. Another group of soldiers had been close enough to help, or none of them would have survived. Even so, he had lost 2 close friends, and his own injuries were severe. His leg was badly injured, and he had a severe concussion. There was no going back to the war. But that didn't mean he could go home right away either. First, he needed medical care and time to heal. It took months, but finally he made it back home. Still, something felt wrong. Everything seemed too small, too closed in. He felt restless. The sound of the wolf's howl never left his mind. As soon as he was strong enough, John returned to Alaska. He hoped it would be the place where he could find peace again. A place to heal, or maybe decide if he even wanted a future at all. He rented the same old cabin he'd stayed in before. On his first day back, he went for a walk. He didn't know what he was looking for, but something seemed to pull him toward a familiar place. He walked to the very spot where he had first met the she-wolf, where he'd rescued her from the trap, and with her he had saved her pups. John climbed the mountain to the place where he had once said goodbye. There, overwhelmed by all the pain and loss from the war, he broke down and cried for the first time. He sat down, rifle in hand, and wondered if life was even worth it anymore. Then, suddenly, his breath caught in his chest. A wolf appeared over the ridge and stared at him. It was her, the she-wolf. Just like before, she howled. It looked like she recognized him too. Then 4 younger wolves came and stood beside her. The pups had all grown up, seeing them there, alive, strong, together. Helped ease the pain of everything John had been through. He had saved them. And now, in this quiet, perfect moment, they were saving him. That gave him something to hold on to, a reason to keep going. Whenever the darkness came back, he would remember this. One of the most powerful, unforgettable moments of his life. Thanks for watching. Join us again for even more amazing stories.